The first year of the Jim Harbaugh era for the Los Angeles Chargers was pretty successful, even though we saw quarterback Justin Herbert and the rest of the offense have a lot less, not really opportunities, but when you look at it in the sense of Justin Herbert set a career low in pass attempts, and even though his passing yards and touchdown numbers were not gaudy, the fifth year quarterback threw only 3 interceptions in 2024, a number that was by far the lowest of his career, as well as the least amount thrown in the league last year. And I think the Chargers knew that even though they had a weak running game for the fifth straight year to start his career, Justin Herbert has not had a 1,000-yard rusher behind him. This is probably the first year that Herbert had a real pure running back behind him. Previous years, it was more of a receiving back in Austin Eckler behind him. But the running game really doesn't get much credit in aiding in the success of Justin Herbert this year. Again, like I mentioned, this was the fifth straight year that there's not been a 1,000-yard rusher for Herbert. This was another year for the Chargers where they were well below average in terms of being able to run the ball. I think outside of Herbert, the guy who is probably the team MVP and probably the guy that deserves a bulk of the credit for this offense at least staying afloat was rookie Ladd McConkey. Probably the best rookie season for a wide receiver in Chargers history. McConkey was only below Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. as the receivers with more catches, yards, and touchdowns than McConkey. And looking at the fact that there really was not another top-notch performance from another pass catcher in 2024, it makes it all the more valuable that McConkey had the year that he did. Now, going into 2025 for the offense, the first thing that should be discussed is the loss of Rashawn Slater. While he did not depart in free agency like the other names that we'll mention soon, he is a guy that the Chargers gave a massive contract extension to, and he will not touch the field in a regular season game until 2026 due to his injury. The offense also will be without Josh Palmer, J.K. Dobbins, and Simi Fehoko as the most notable losses from the offense. And while these are not names that push the needle for the Chargers, they are guys that were integral to the success of this team, and they helped keep the offense afloat, especially when they couldn't just force the ball to Ladd McConkey. Now, the additions for the Chargers are going to be very interesting. All three of Najee Harris, Keenan Allen, and Mekhi Becton, who are probably the most notable additions to the offense through free agency, all come over at major positions of need for the Chargers. But each guy has something sort of negative that could be brought up as to why it might not be the best move for the Chargers. Now, Najee Harris comes over after having 4 straight seasons of 1,000-yard rushing performances, but he also suffered an eye injury due to a fireworks incident just a little over a month ago. Keenan Allen comes over as a solid number 2 receiver, but he's definitely in the final stages of his career. And up until last year, Mekhi Becton was sort of viewed as a first-round bust until he played with the Eagles last year. So while all of these guys are going to be important pieces going into 2025, if these guys don't play well, it could really spell disaster for the Chargers. Now, the draft in 2025 is where I see more of a chance for some juice to be added to the offensive group. Omarion Hampton comes in as the first running back drafted in the first round for the Chargers since Melvin Gordon in 2015. Hampton leads a group of playmakers drafted in 2025 that will be major in replicating some of the success that the Chargers had in 2024. Trey Harris and Keandre Lambert-Smith are 2 receivers that will be relied on heavily to fill out the room with Allen, McConkey, and third-year wideout Quentin Johnston. Now, defensively is where this team really set the bar high in 2024. This team was first in the entire league in terms of points allowed in the NFL. They took care of the offenses that were less dangerous, and they helped keep their offense in every single game. In fact, in their 6 losses, there were only 2 instances that they lost by 10 or more points. I think the stat that best describes this defense is that the Chargers went 10-1 in games in which they scored at least 20 points. And, 20 points is really not a lot in today's NFL. Because this defense also kept opposing teams at 20 points or less, In 12 of 17 games, the Chargers were competitive in virtually every single contest of 2024. It again was the young players that led this team on the defensive side of the ball. Tarheeb Steele, who was a 22-year-old fifth-round rookie last year, led this team in interceptions. Tuli Tuipulotu, at 22 and in his second season, led the defense in sacks, QB hits, and tackles for loss. And Dion Henley, who was in his second season but only his first as a starter, led this team with 147 tackles and played well in pass coverage as well. It's those same young players that will have an even bigger role in 2025 as well. Joey Bosa, Christian Fulton, and Poona Ford highlight the veteran losses for this defense. The loss of Bosa is obviously the most notable, as he was a first-round pick for the Chargers in 2016. He was a 5-time Pro Bowler for the club, and he was the last guy for this franchise that saw the turnover from it being led by Phillip Rivers to Justin Herbert. In terms of the additions to the defense through free agency, there are some names of interest, including Dante Jackson, Benjamin St-Juste, and Naquan Jones. The Chargers also drafted Kyle Kennard in the 4th round of this year's draft, and while there is hope that he will be another youthful addition that plays well in 2025, where I am sure the Chargers are going to be looking to get their biggest improvement from is those young guys that were called on last year. And outside of those young players, this team does still have a lot of really good veteran players, namely Khalil Mack, Denzel Perriman, and Derwin James. Looking at this team and how their schedule plays out in 2025, I really think that with the improvement of the Denver Broncos and just how good the Kansas City Chiefs are, this is probably the 3rd best team in the AFC West. They're handedly better than the Las Vegas Raiders, and with 2 games against the Raiders each year, they're they're going to have 2 pretty easy wins, in my opinion. But there's a lot of games on this schedule that are pretty tough. You go to the Chiefs, you go to the Broncos, obviously, but your teams that you host, like the Eagles, the Commanders, the Vikings, Steelers, that kind of leads to the chance of some disappointing losses at home. And honestly, that's kind of how I see this season going, is we might look back and think of this team as a little bit of a disappointment after 2025. I just don't really see this being a team that's going to take anybody off guard. They're not going to be a team that's going to just have something better than their opponent. They have a really good quarterback, and they have some solid pieces around him, but they don't have that other piece on offense that just really makes you think of them as real contenders, even in their own division. And so it's for that reason mostly that I see this team as possibly one of the surprising playoff teams that are not going to make the playoffs. This isn't, like I said, this isn't a game-breaking offense. This isn't a league-stopping defense. This is a really good team, but they're missing something. They hope Amarian Hampton, they hope Ladd McConkey, they hope the younger players on this offense play really well, but it's probably not going to be enough, like I said, to just take them over the top and automatically make them division contenders or contenders in the AFC as a whole.